Jacob Jenkins, known to his fellow monks as Brother Jacob, was a man whose calm demeanor and unwavering faith made him an unlikely candidate for such a tragic fate. He was born in Burlington, Vermont, where his family lived a humble but peaceful life. Jacob's father, a hard-working carpenter, raised him with strong values of honesty, integrity, and kindness. Jacob's mother, who passed away when he was just a child, had instilled in him the importance of compassion and love for others. Jacob often felt a void in his heart after his mother's death, a void that no one seemed able to fill. He poured his heart into his studies, finding solace in the words of Scripture and the comfort of prayer. But it was only after his father fell ill that Jacob felt a deep calling to something greater. His father, who had always been a source of strength, became frail, and Jacob was forced to make a choice: continue his life as a carpenter or dedicate himself to something more. He chose the latter, seeking a path that would not only give him purpose, but also allow him to help others in their most vulnerable moments. Jacob's journey led him to the Church of St. Stephen, where he trained for many years. He became a monk, eventually being sent to Marble Ridge in 2010 to oversee a small monastery. The monastery was quiet and secluded, nestled on the edge of town. Jacob found peace there. The landscape of Marble Ridge, with its sprawling hills and gentle flowing streams, seemed to reflect the inner calm Jacob sought in his life. At the monastery, Jacob lived a modest life, focused on prayer and service. He didn't need much. His faith and the work he did with the children in the town filled him with a sense of purpose. Marble Ridge embraced him, and Jacob came to feel like one of their own. The children he taught regarded him as a father figure, looking up to him for not only his knowledge, but for his unwavering commitment to their well-being. He became a trusted part of the fabric of Marble Ridge, respected by all who knew him. But while Jacob was a man of peace, he was also deeply aware of the flaws in the world around him. As he grew older, he became more reflective, and this led him to see the cracks in the monastery he had called home. The men who had taken vows of service, some of whom had been close to him, began to show signs of moral failure. Jacob could no longer turn a blind eye to what was happening behind closed doors. Corruption had crept into the heart of the place he held sacred, and he could no longer remain silent. The morning of September 13, 2014, seemed like any other. The monks rose early, the cool autumn air seeping into the monastery through open windows. They had their breakfast, and then Jacob went off to his study, as was his habit. But that morning, Jacob did not arrive for morning prayers. Father Charles, one of the older monks who had known Jacob for years, went to check on him. He knocked on the door softly at first, but when there was no response, he pushed the door open. Jacob's room was empty, his bed undisturbed. Father Charles's heart skipped a beat. Jacob had never been late to morning prayers. He was the epitome of punctuality. Something about this felt off. Charles quickly checked the adjoining rooms and walked through the small courtyard, calling Jacob's name. No response. Panic slowly began to spread through the monastery. The other monks began searching the grounds. They checked the kitchen, the garden, the small chapel, every place Jacob was known to spend time. As they walked outside, Father Charles noticed something strange. The back door to the monastery was wide open. The door led to the rear garden, a place where Jacob often spent time reflecting. The cool autumn breeze blew through the door, rustling the leaves on the ground. But there was no sign of Jacob. The monks grew more anxious as the hours passed. Jacob's personal belongings were still in his room. His books, his robes, his diary, all perfectly arranged. It was as if he had just stepped out for a walk. But why had he not said a word? Why had he left the monastery without a trace? As the hours turned into a day, the monks alerted the local authorities. The police arrived in the early afternoon, and the search continued. They combed through the monastery's grounds and the surrounding woods, calling Jacob's name and searching for any sign of him. But there was nothing. No clues, no footprints, no signs of struggle. Nothing. Days turned into weeks, and the search continued with no results. The once peaceful town of Marble Ridge began to feel the weight of the mystery. Where had Brother Jacob gone? What had happened to him? Was he simply gone, or had something sinister occurred? 5 long years passed before the investigation finally took a turn. It was the summer of 2019 when a crew of workers arrived at the monastery grounds to clear some overgrown brush. They were tasked with clearing a small patch of land that had become too wild with ivy and foliage. The workers, accustomed to finding small items of interest in the earth, didn't expect to uncover anything of consequence. But as they worked, one of the workers noticed something unusual. An old well, its cover nearly hidden by the overgrowth. Curious, the worker approached the well, and as he peered into its depths, something caught his eye. A body. Weighted down by rocks, it lay motionless at the bottom of the well. The worker called his supervisor, and the police were immediately notified. The scene was secured, and investigators arrived at the well. As they pulled the body from the well, their worst fears were confirmed. It was Brother Jacob. The man who had disappeared nearly 5 years earlier was finally found. The discovery was nothing short of shocking. The body was intact, but showed clear signs of trauma. Jacob had suffered a blow to the head before being tossed into the well. The police confirmed that the cause of death was blunt force trauma, and the manner of death appeared to be a violent murder. But the bigger question remained: who would have killed Brother Jacob, and why? The town of Marble Ridge, still reeling from the discovery, was thrust back into a state of uncertainty. Jacob, once the epitome of kindness and faith, had been murdered, and no one knew why. As the investigation was reopened, the community began to fear the worst. Someone within their midst had taken the life of a beloved figure. Who could have committed such a heinous act? The reopening of the case was filled with frustration and confusion. The police interviewed the monks once again, but this time the questions were sharper. Father Elias, the monk who had been closest to Jacob, became a person of interest. Elias had been behaving strangely in the weeks before Jacob's disappearance. His late-night walks around the monastery had raised suspicions among the other monks, and it was soon discovered that he had been acting nervously, avoiding questions about his whereabouts. The investigation into Father Elias revealed troubling secrets. Jacob had been quietly gathering evidence of corruption within the monastery. Money intended for charitable purposes had been embezzled, and several monks were involved in illegal activities, including accepting bribes. Jacob had discovered these secrets and had been planning to expose the wrongdoers. Was this the reason for his murder? The case took a surprising turn when Clara, a former friend of Jacob's, came forward with key information. Clara had overheard a heated argument between Jacob and Father Elias several weeks before his disappearance. Jacob had been furious with Elias for his involvement in the corruption and had threatened to expose him. Clara had overheard their conversation while walking near the monastery garden, and she had hidden behind a tree, unsure of what to do. Clara's confession was the final piece of the puzzle. Father Elias had killed Jacob to silence him, fearing the repercussions of his actions being exposed. The police now had the motive they needed. Father Elias was arrested and brought in for questioning. At first, he denied everything. But when confronted with the evidence, Clara's testimony, his suspicious behavior, and the financial misdeeds, he finally cracked. He confessed to the murder, explaining that he had killed Jacob to protect his secret. The trial was a painful process for the townspeople of Marble Ridge. Many had once considered Father Elias a friend, a man of faith. To hear that he had killed Jacob, the man who had been like a father to so many, was devastating. But the truth was undeniable. Father Elias was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. The town, though grieving, found some solace in knowing that justice had been served. The monastery, forever stained by the events that had occurred within its walls, was no longer the symbol of peace it once was. But the memory of Brother Jacob lived on, and his legacy of kindness and faith would not be forgotten. The trial marked the end of the long, painful journey for the community of Marble Ridge. The town had lost one of its most beloved figures, and the monastery that had once been a source of solace was now a reminder of the darkness that could hide in even the most sacred of places. For those who had known Jacob, however, the truth was a bittersweet victory. The community had lost a pillar of strength, but justice had finally been served. The memory of Brother Jacob would continue to live on in the hearts of the children he had taught, the people he had helped, and the legacy of the man who had always chosen faith and service over everything else.